Hi, this is Melissa Rondo here. I am true crime therapist, and I am joined today with Sasha Reid and Nancy Schwartzman. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so
Thanks
much
for
for
having
having us.
Can you both introduce yourselves?
Nancy, you want to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. I am Nancy Schwartzman. I am the executive producer and director of the series Sasha Reid and the Midnight Order. I am an investigative filmmaker, documentaries. Really, my main passion is looking at sort of the intersection of crime and how it generally tends to impact women in vulnerable communities, and also really passionate about platforming young women who do investigative work and people who work outside the system and really bring their wisdom and insights to crime and vulnerable populations, that just taking a fresh approach to the genre of crime.
Yeah, we need women
And
like you in the world. Thank you.
we do. My name is Dr. Sasha Reid, and I'm a developmental psychologist and law student. Actually, no, I'm done. I am done forever being a student for now. Articling student. I work with my team, the Midnight Order, and we try to understand criminal psychology, forensics, and employ multidisciplinary knowledge to help people who come to us with requests for assistance.
That's amazing work. I just so proud to be here and have this time to speak with you.
Thank you.
So, I was looking for like-minded females, and I was searching psychology, serial killers, injustices to women, and up popped your name. And then I started looking more into your work, and I'm like, this woman is amazing. Like, I knew immediately we could spend hours talking because I have the similar passions to you. And then, as you know, we met in person at CrimeCon. And when I got to CrimeCon, I got that tote bag and it said Sasha Reid in the Midnight Order. And all I was thinking, like, you and Nancy have been so busy.
Understatement of the universe. Yeah.
Yeah. um, so first, congratulations on the new show. I streamed it on Hulu. I saw the first episode. I was completely hooked immediately. It was done so well. It was so interesting. The only disappointment is I can't get to the second episode yet.
You have to wait. It is weekly. I just need to
Oh,
announce, because you're getting us at a really special time, that yesterday we were number 3 on Hulu. So
oh,
um,
congratulations. Well
yeah,
deserved.
it's just
Very cool.
amazing because we just got to beat the Kardashians and The Bachelor or Sasha Reid and the Midnight Order. I mean, this is where we are. So yeah, I think people don't really realize that this is a documentary, and Dr. Sasha Reid is a real person, and these are real cases, and it looks like a show, but
Yeah.
actually it's real life unfolding, and these are real people volunteering their talents and time to do this work.
Yeah, and that's exactly what as a person watching it, that's what made it so special to me. And that's exactly what I kept thinking to myself. I'm like, this is real women that are dedicating their time and their talent and their passion and their motivation to give a voice to people that don't have a voice. And, Sasha, I was telling you that you really had me when I heard you say trauma informed, because I think that's such a critical element of being an investigator is to understand the trauma to the community, the trauma to the victims' families. And can you speak about how that's important to you in your work?
Yeah, so I come from obviously a background of psychology, so I'm well acquainted with these terms and these ideas, and you can understand them from an academic point of view, but when you actually start to get into communities and work with people, you see the way in which trauma from these experiences have infiltrated every single aspect of their lives. And it doesn't matter if the case is a year old or 40 years old, that trauma lives with them. And so I think it needs to be honored. And I think in speaking with so many of the families we've talked to, they have felt ignored, they felt neglected, they felt abused by the systems that are there to protect them. And so for us, it was really important to be able to engage them in a way that respects, first and foremost, their experience, their trauma, and the feelings that surround this. So being trauma informed is really a core of the Midnight Order.
Yeah, and I think that is one thing that I thought was really incredibly special. Um, I'd like to know if you can each speak to what you find particularly interesting or unique about this documentary.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off Sasha talking about trauma informed in their work, as a filmmaker, a storyteller who puts things in front of hopefully millions of people. There's so much, for me, thought and care that goes into what we share, what we show, um, how we portray various stories, how we, expose systemic harms while also like respecting all parties involved. And that's like trauma informed filmmaking. Um, However, that can't shy away from the truth either, right? So it's always this really interesting balance of bringing, how do we do no harm, right? Or really mitigate any harm that like making a big show might have. I was really adamant that a lot of true crime programming and I love crime because looking at it because it's a mirror to our society and it can really point out where are the gaps in care, where are the people that fall in the cracks, why does this happen, what are the patterns. Telling a bigger story around crime to me feels trauma informed, right? It's sort of understanding people's backgrounds from the perpetrators to victims, and then how law enforcement has biases and why this happens. So I think what's really different about Sasha Reid and the Midnight Order as a show is that, we really work to show the whole ecosystem around particular crimes, what was going on at the time, how were social mores changing, like even in episode 1, Christine Prince, the first victim, it's an important point that she was going out late. She went to the movie. She went by herself. She went with friends and then took the train home. Stuff that we take for granted on some level now, right? It's like, of course, I'm going to go out and then come home. I work and I earn my own money and I can do what I want. But that was pretty new at the time, right? So was a perpetrator taking advantage of a lot more young women sort of unaccompanied walking around? And I think we want to think about the way certain victims take up public space. Are we allowed to be out late at night? Are we going to have consequences or face violence? So that's one part. Talking to law enforcement is another part. Talking to victims. So really just doing like a whole sort of 360 of a crime or incidents, I think makes the show different, and also doing it through the lens of the Midnight Order, young women who can relate to the population being targeted and who are bringing a much more empathetic perspective to everything.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I that was one thing I took away from it as well. I was realizing from the investigative techniques, it was so interesting about all the collaboration with the local law enforcement, like the interview that was done, or speaking to victims' families and seeing their impact. And then, like you said, even seeing how these things impact the community and how it can bring fear to the community, or um, how people can lose faith in their local law enforcement or gain faith and all of these kind of things. So you got me curious. How did you both meet?
Well, okay. We met, Nancy, I think this is right, so tell me if I'm wrong, but basically what happened was 2018, somewhere around there, there was a whole Bruce MacArthur incident, and there was an article published, and that article managed to find its way to Nancy. Nancy reads that article and contacts me, and that kind of is it. That's the bare bones basics of it, but she really hooked me because she said, listen, I'm a feminist filmmaker. Victims are important. The work that you're doing is interesting. And she really wanted to highlight the stories of victims and women. A lot of people have been getting in touch with me, but I thought Nancy was authentic and honest in her goals and her vision. So we stayed in touch.
And Nancy, from your perspective, what did you see in Sasha that you thought was special or?
Oh, I mean, I really was, coming off the heels of my first film, Roll Red Roll, where this outsider blogger kind of uncovered the social, not the crime itself, we knew the crime, but like the context that enabled the crime, which was the Steubenville rape case. And she really wasn't taken seriously, was a paralegal, not a lawyer, but really knew her way around the internet and knew where to look. And I was like, you are so smart and you have cracked open something much bigger than just the headlines. So it kind of occurred to me, I think women, really can have a very unique perspective. And it's unfortunate that sometimes we're not taken seriously, and we're not given sort of the credo that we deserve. But it also means, I think, I don't know, Sasha working quietly on her own, gathering data, noticing patterns. I'm just like, oh yeah, this is like not working fully on her own, but
Yeah.
Just sort of quietly doing the work and looking where other people are not looking, to me is always a really like fascinating way in to a crime or a story. And then I called her and we started, I was probably lightly begging her to participate in something that had no form at all. But after initial interviews and meeting her and Aya and then meeting the larger group, it was like, what an amazing group of people, of young people who want to do this work and are outside of law enforcement, but bringing all these incredible skills. What does it look like when they all get together? And
Mm.
knowing how deeply Sasha had sort of like mentored so many people. And like, I think we all need that. And I love when Sasha says like the Midnight Order is kind of the mentorship opportunity I would have loved, and I
Yep.
think capturing that on camera is really powerful as well.
Yeah. Where did the name Midnight Order come from? I love
From
it.
a jumbled collection of nonsense in my head. So at the time, I was reading a lot of, Aleister Crowley. Okay, and I don't know if you know him, but he's this magician, occultist guy. Anyways, really, really interesting. And he had all of these cool names like the Order of the Golden Dawn. And I thought, oh, that's so freaking cool. That's a really neat name. I wonder if I could do something fun and exciting as well, something that just, I don't know, gets to the core of what I'm personally interested, which is the dark and mysterious and whatever else. And I didn't want to make it too scary and too serious. I didn't want it to be occult-y, but I did want it to be fun. So I thought, okay, when I was a kid, what did I watch? Well, I watched a lot of like Mary Kate and Ashley. They were detectives. They had their own agency, but I didn't want to be that. Um, but I also watched a lot of Are You Afraid of the Dark? And it's a Canadian TV show where kids come around this campfire late at night and they tell scary stories. And they were called the Midnight Society. We're gathered here, the Midnight Society, whatever. And I thought, oh, I want to do something like that. And so I kind of just combined all of these elements of things that I thought were interesting and I enjoyed from childhood, and I created Midnight Order.
It's absolutely brilliant. Yeah. When I heard it, it created so much mystery for me, but I also saw it was like playful at the same time and like just hold it all together. It
That's
was
exactly what it's supposed to be. That's
perfect.
because I want it to be as dark as the things are that we study. There has to be some levity. There needs to be lightness because it really is mentorship. How can we help you grow and develop? And, whether that's personally, professionally, or academically, I want you to have fun in everything you do while respecting the difficult things that we study. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Love it. And Nancy too, I want to go back just for a second to something you said that was so interesting about perspective. I remember years ago following the story about how Osama bin Laden was detected, and the CIA at the time had mostly men, and they were kind of like, we're going to go in there, we're going to find him, we're like muscle our way in. And there was one female analyst who said, no, 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 no. We're going to take this a totally different perspective and we're going to find out where his kids are. And we're gonna, because if we can find where his kids are, we're gonna find him. We're gonna find him because he's communicating with his kids. And like that has stuck with me my whole life about how important it is to have a completely different perspective. And that's why I thought it's so powerful too, as a group of females. It's a totally different perspective looking at a cold case, missing and murdered people. They bring such a unique perspective to solve crimes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think I forgot that that detail about detecting him. Yeah, I think it's, look, I love right now, two of the members of the Midnight Order are moving towards working inside law enforcement. Like that's also really cool. Like they started out sort of on the outside and like their skill set just keeps growing. And now they want to bring that to law enforcement. And we really hope that those traditional institutions will make room for this new perspective so that also these young women who have this amazing perspective and passion can get the tools and toys that law enforcement gets to use, in terms of doing deeper investigation. But I think, yeah, outside the box thinking is what it's all about. And, also Sasha was so forward thinking, maybe not even consciously, but around crafting those massive databases, right? Because those databases harness so many possibilities. And just, I'm starting to really understand you better, Sasha, like the feeling of like, not even overwhelmed, but like, what do I do? What do I do with this information? What do I do with the scope of all of this? I'm going to harness it and like categorize it. I think, I think that's the Sasha Reid way. And now
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, what do
Yeah.
I do with this? I, write a million notes and craft 100 stories and maybe get lucky and get to make a TV show, so, but it's the same impulse, I think, is like, there's so much going on around us. There's so many details to track that can inform the thing, whether it's the crime or the why or the how, and then how do we like harness and organize it, is also just, I think, very unique to the Midnight Order is those databases. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you actually speak more about that? Because I had a couple of questions. I mean, I read that it's one of the world's largest. Is the data inputted only Canadian data, or is there anything cross-border into the US or?
So we actually have two databases. We've got the serial homicide database and the missing murder database. Serial homicide database is one of the largest databases on serial killers in the world. So that one's completely global and historical. And then the missing murder database is only Canadian. So here we're looking at every single province and territory and inputting information for every single cold case that exists historically and contemporaneously. It's massive. It's massive. And it is the largest in the nation. I've contacted and been contacted by law enforcement. I've helped law enforcement on one occasion just better understand what they can do in terms of developing a database. And that really caught me off guard. The idea that Canada does not have a database like that, like it actually doesn't exist. And you'd think there's no way, right? Canada's a developed nation, of course. No, no.
Yeah, that's
And that's
shocking to me
wild.
too. Yeah. I mean, especially too after the Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka murders, right? I mean, I knew that brought a lot of attention and awareness. They made me start putting Canada on the map as a place where there's serial killers and these things are happening. So that is shocking to me as well.
Yeah, well, I always get so frustrated when I'm reading these inquiries about serial killers because, Canada has a serial killer. We tend to have an inquiry that follows. And so many of them, it comes down to linkage blindness and police aren't talking to one another. And it's like, well, how can we help remedy that? A database might be great, one that's not limited to a jurisdiction. Why don't we look nationally? So it just makes sense that a database like this would exist. And it's about time.
Yeah, that's amazing. And can you explain to what does linkage blindness mean?
So linkage blindness is essentially when crimes are being committed and you're not able to make that link between them, whether it's between province or whether it's even within a city. Maybe there's elements of that crime that don't really connect very well, and so you completely miss those links. Or if they're committed across province or even across different cities, you're not able to see what's going on in another jurisdiction. So you might think, oh, we have a lot of sexual assaults in our city, but it's limited to our city. But you don't necessarily know that there's actually exactly the same type of sexual assault happening in a jurisdiction next to you. You need to know that that's happening because serial killers are people. People travel. Basic. It's basic.
Yeah.
And so we need to be able to identify what are the strings in criminal behavior that cross borders. And if you are blind to the links, that's like linkage blindness. You'll never be able to see what's going on.
Which means then they can't solve crimes, or it makes it more difficult to solve crimes.
It makes it a lot more difficult to solve crimes, to catch perpetrators, to link victims. It just makes everything harder, like everything harder.
I also think,
Okay, sorry, Nancy.
oh yeah, I just want to throw out that, working on this side in America, we obviously have our problems, but we are wildly more transparent with our documents in the United States. So Canada really does not release information about victims, about autopsies, police reports, FOIAs. They also tend to sort of, once they nab the guy, if he takes a plea, like George Sutherland, or, it's like we put him away and then we seal the documents. Like, so there's someone who was eventually caught. I won't spoil it for episode 2.
Okay.
Responsible for 2 homicides and possibly more, but it's just sealed away now. And so instead of there being a much more public trial where we can get more information and do disclosures and all that kind of stuff, Canada sort of has a tendency, and with Robert Pickton, who's the second half of our series, which I can't wait for you to watch. I mean, that's the really big serial homicide case of Canada. There's so much that was not made public to community and to the country. And that's so much learning that doesn't get to get done. That's so much beyond, harms to victims. It's like policing could improve by hundreds if that case was like really properly analyzed instead of, oh, this was bad and this didn't happen. These reports are made. So sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but just to say that what Sasha's doing is really gathering this information that sort of the larger government doesn't want to see. It feels like, it's like, well, when you look at it, then you have to do something about it. And if they were to release more documents about what actually goes down in the various crimes, then people like Sasha and academics and forensic experts could lend support to solving things more quickly and preventing things.
And
Yeah.
preventing things, yeah.
Yeah,
I think Nancy's totally like, you have every right to be so angry. We filmed for like a period of time, but the team had researched for years and had been attempting for years to get certain documents that we used in the show. And it shouldn't be that difficult. It should never be that difficult. So I'm angry. That was wild.
Do you have any insight why they guard everything so closely and don't find the value of bringing it to more public awareness?
Well, they
It
say
wasn't always that way.
Oh, sorry. Well, the answer now, and I'd love to hear the history, is to protect privacy of 2 things: to protect the privacy of victims and their families, even though the victims are asking for these things to be released. And there's privacy, there's defamation, and then there's also, if it's an open investigation, we can't release it. If it's unsolved, but this is something that's 40 years old. So when I share that in America, people are like, 40 years old, come on. Like, that case is colder than cold. So that's what they say. And my theory is sort of, let's just clean it up, keep it neat and clean, keep people in the dark, kind of. So that's how it feels as someone trying to tell stories about it.
Yeah.
Sasha.
Well, for me, it feels like when they're saying we're protecting the victims, we're protecting the families, in many instances, you are not. In fact, you're actively preventing a real investigation, especially when families are saying, please release these documents, please get this information out. So that in those situations, and that's not every time, but in those situations, that explanation doesn't hold up. In other instances, it also doesn't hold up. Like if you have an investigation that's decades old, that you have no suspects for, that you are really struggling, and you know it's not going to get solved without additional input, leads, tips, and the last remaining family members of the victims are also going, they're getting up there in age.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you share that information and at least give a little bit more hope? It was not always like this. I remember in 2018, I applied to get a bunch of criminal records for serial killers because I wanted to do a study on just the developmental trajectory of criminals and their crimes, specifically serial killers. And it was easy. Send a quick email to the RCMP. They were very nice. They sent all that data. You just had to pay whatever. And now you have to be part of the government. Like, why? I'm an academic researcher. I'm affiliated with an institution. I'm an adjunct professor. I have a legitimate reason for doing this. This is not to like call you out. This is to trace developmental factors of serial homicide. And they're like, no, for what reason? For what reason? I do a little bit, and this is my own personal take, think it comes down to ego. I want to be the one to solve the case. It has to be us. It has to be, and that ick. It's not about you.
Yeah.
It's not about us. It's about the families and the victims and however they want the investigation to go. I think that should kind of be the way it goes, with the exception, and I'll always agree with this, of hold back information. And that's information that points to either an offender or say a behavioral characteristic that only the offender would know, or something that they did with the body that only the offender would know. And if you give that information out, then maybe you're going to have a lot of people coming in and saying, falsely confessing or doing this, that, and the other. Keep holdback information, but don't pretend that everything is holdback information. It's not.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, agreed. I did an interview with, from a U.S. perspective, with an FBI agent who works for the Behavioral Analysis Unit, and you'd probably enjoy talking to her. She shares your sentiments that like you said, there's certain holdbacks, but not everything, and we got to put it out there because those are somebody might come forward to say, this sounds like somebody I know, or you find out something about the victim and their history, and this is not victim blaming, of course, but it could be an important element that maybe they were dating someone that no one knew about, and that person was ruled out, not even considered a suspect. So these are all important things to have all this information come forward as part of an investigation.
Well, you don't know what's important until you know what's important. And how could you when you're operating in intellectual silos, right? You need multidisciplinary knowledge. You need multiple viewpoints and perspectives. And I think at a certain point, when you have these decades old cold cases, that's the time. That's the time to open it up.
Yeah.
I just want to throw out there also, and that's, I love what you're saying, Sash. This idea also with law enforcement and our public servants, right? That, we want to work together, we want to respect your process, but we all also have to remember that they also work for the citizens of the country. They are public servants. So we also are entitled to call them out or hold them to account, right? That's part of the agreement here, right? They should not be an untouchable institution. This doesn't mean they're not completely valid, and we absolutely need their help and we want to work together. It's just like, I think there's a disconnect understanding that these are people who work for the good of the community and they're public servants, right? So they have an obligation, at least I'm used to, an obligation of transparency at a level that just doesn't occur in Canada. That feels like a hindrance to democracy, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Are you feeling optimistic with all this amazing work that you're doing, that this could change now or in the future?
That's part of the goal. That's part of the mission. So the Midnight Order is very much, we're trying to do as much as we can in terms of our investigations, but we realize investigations are one piece of being able to help people get justice. There's another component of that, and that's bringing in positive legislation that's victim-centered and that helps promote a better understanding of the trauma that victims experience. So we are trying at the moment to start a nonprofit. It's called the National Cold Case Initiative And that is going to be about changing legislation, pushing forward policy, working with stakeholders to try to see what we can do to make the solution of cold cases in Canada better. Like find a better avenue other than keeping things in storage for 40 years and pretending like you're doing something about it.
Right. Yeah.
And we think, you know, highlighting the work of the Midnight Order, and showing, you know, what they're doing and what some of the roadblocks are. And hopefully we'll get to do more storytelling. So we have 4 more episodes to go, obviously. And then there are just so many other things to explore in the future, but really also showing how important it is when this team shines their light on something that's considered closed or something that's considered done and dusted. And that's definitely to come. It's so clear later episodes that there's so much to uncover. There's so much worth relooking at, and there's more that can be done. We really hope it does sort of accelerate the understanding that more transparency is necessary, and then coupled with a nonprofit that can push for policy change is really great, because that's not what a TV show does, you know. But
Yeah, I can see all the good that is coming out of this and all the awareness that it's raising. Um, and I don't mean to like bounce around. Like I talk to you ladies, like I know we do not have all day, but I could. This is like so I'm so passionate about this. Like I'm I want to go back for just a minute because I'm so curious. Like Nancy, what got you involved um in wanting to do this type of filmmaking and this type of work in your background? Where did this passion come from?
yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I would say, you know, it's not like a joyful beginning to exploring violence against women. You know, I'm a victim of violence. At 25, I was assaulted, and you know, it had always been in my field of awareness as a young person, and I feel lucky that people would tell me their stories. I had no training, but I had a lot of young friends. Like this is like middle school, and you know, coming and sharing with me. So I really would felt honored that from a very early age, I was considered kind of a safe space for people. So my awareness that stuff went on and little girls were harmed and sexualized was always very high, because that was many friends of mine when I was growing up. And then I later experienced violence myself. And the way I sort of tried to understand it was I made a film about it. So that started the early you know, combination of like thing that sucks and is bad. How do I like unpack it and understand it and investigate it, not to heal, because it is not a healing process, but to like truly understand. And I found a comfort in investigation and like just asking questions, like, why did this happen? Like I was assaulted by someone, and it was like, what was he thinking? Why did it happen? When was the moment it shifted? What is the context? What, you know, he and I are from different cultures. Like, what's my culture? What's his culture? Does that matter? What do these people think? You know, so it was just kind of this early way for me to understand crime, right? And crime against women and sexual violence. So that's what started it. And it was, honestly, it was like almost a survival mechanism, you know, of like pivoting to investigation and inquiry. Investigation's like, you know, intense. So it was just like an inquiry at first, and then turning it into a film. So from there, it just is so clear that violence against women is just like endemic. It's endemic in every culture and every society and every class and every race. And I became more and more passionate about strategies for prevention, whether that's educating people or making films that like punch them in the gut. You know, my first 2 features are like, grr, they're really intense. And I also, so, you know, my passion was for like exposing the problem and trying to point to solutions that don't make women and their activism the core of the solution. Like I think the core of the solution is getting men on board to do the work, right? That was my earlier films, right? It's sort of like women know this stuff. I'm
Yeah.
not here to teach women how to be safe. I want men to step up and create safer societies. I want men to step up and call out their colleagues. I want men to step up and call out their teammates.
Yes.
So it's just not our job, right? I'm just done with that. However, meeting Sasha in the Midnight Order, it was like, ooh, this is so different. 'Cause I love women in action. My God, what could be more fun, you know? And
Mhm.
like, it's just really dimensional, this project, and this one feels, well, I also love being around brilliant women and being like humbled by how smart the entire team is. Everyone that we hired to make the show, we're like, buckle up. They're a lot younger than you. They have double the degrees that you have. So get ready to feel humble, right? But which is great, you know. So the passion with Sasha Reid and the Midnight Order is just the ensemble, the power of the group, the strong personalities, and you know, really diving into some meaty cases and bringing lots of different methodologies to it.
Yeah, amazing. Like you are a symbol of transforming trauma through a
Mm,
creative process. It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that too.
thank you.
Sasha, did you want, I was curious too, what started your passion to get involved in all of this?
Okay. Ugh, it goes all over the place because it's not like an event happened and then my life changed. This was my life always. I don't ever remember a time in my life where I wasn't completely fascinated with investigating things. Like I told you at the beginning, my favorite shows growing up, like Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen, the detective agency, whatever. So I was always really interested in investigation. Mom had tons of books about unsolved mysteries. Oh, the 80s were amazing for stuff like that. But also, I was always, always fascinated with monsters. I would read books about werewolves and vampires. I watched Buffy all the time. I mean, my absolute mentor, Buffy, she's my icon. But I grew up in a forest, and like literally, when I say I grew up in a forest, I did. There was a smaller city, like under 10,000 people close to me, but I grew up outside of that. I was in the sticks. And, you know, at that time, there wasn't a whole lot of things for girls to do. We didn't, like, we had ballet, but there wasn't much else. And even if there was, I don't think I'd be that interested. I wanted to spend time in the forest finding monsters. Um, so that's always been something that interested me. And then, you know, you grow up and you have experiences and you realize the monsters that I understood in childhood, werewolves and vampires, while I love the idea of them, I know that they're not real. I know that they're not real, but I'd experienced enough to understand that people can do monstrous things. And that got me hooked. Basically, I had some really tough experiences growing up, some really bad ones. And, you know, when you're a kid, it's really hard to be able to verbalize abuse. It's really hard to be able to verbalize the bad things that are happening to you. So you just internalize, right? You know this, of course you know this. You just internalize it, right? It's my fault. I'm the bad one. And I thought that for a really, really long time. But then I read a book. I mean, I read a lot of books, but I read one particular book. It was Robert Hare's Without Conscience, and it was about psychopaths. And that moment was like the big aha moment for me. For the first time in my life, I had an explanation as to what happened to me and why. And the fact that this isn't a me problem, there are people like this, and those people are the problem. And being able to understand why, why this happened gave me such a feeling of empowerment that I thought, I want to dedicate the rest of my life to helping other people find out why, whatever that why is. And so that's what I've done.
Amazing. Yeah, I very briefly share with you ladies too, because you don't know some of my history too. Like I grew up in a family where my father was a police officer and then he became a detective. And when you work for really small departments, that means my dad was he was investigating homicides. They investigate drugs. It's not like these big departments in say the use of the US in New York City, right? They have very specialized departments. So talking about murder was something common as like eating a banana in my house, right? And then I went to go work for the police department for about a year to follow in my dad's footsteps, but I became the victim of a crime, and I was raped when I was very young as a teenager. And for me, what made me fascinated was the conversation about how that affects the victim is not discussed long term, because after that happened to me, I was my whole neurological system was so dysregulated that,
Mhm.
and I was having symptoms pretty much my whole life. At this point, it's like I know something's going to trigger me, but I just had to learn at some point like how to self-regulate. So that's what got me interested in doing true crime therapist, because I wanted to highlight the impact of crime on victims. We can't forget about the victims and the rest of their lives. I mean, these women like myself and like us, we're going to take that trauma and the abuse, and we have to carry that our whole life. And we have to decide what we're going to do with that. For me, it was this project right here. This is what I'm doing with it. So,
Wow.
Well, thanks for sharing. I'm sorry that happened to
thank
you.
you.
It's so
Thank you.
different when it happens at different ages. And I think teenage years are so formative, and that's such a terrible way to start becoming an adult. It's
Yes.
like, yeah, yeah. So really sorry, but I'm glad that you brought us all together.
Yes, it brought us all together. That's exactly it. And so actually I want to ask too, Sasha, now that I said I was going to bounce around really quick. Can you just tell me, how do you decide which cold cases that you and the Midnight Order will investigate? And if somebody wants to share, if somebody wanted to reach you and submit a case, is that possible? Can they do that?
Yeah, so I'll start with that one first. The way you can reach us is we have an email address. We've also got like a TikTok and an Insta. Find us wherever. We're on social media at the Midnight Order, at the Dr. Reid, the real Dr. Reid, or email us at midnightordermmd@gmail.com. And if you're not sure if your case is good, it doesn't matter. Send us your information. I mean, we're always happy, even just to listen to your stories, just to hear what you have to say. We are always happy to chat. But then, in terms of cold cases and how we decide which case to take, there's a couple of things. So, one, we do tend to take Canadian cases because the MMD, Missing Murder Database, is located in Canada, so that just it makes it easier for us. However, again, understanding that serial killers travel, we're always open to hearing American cases as well. We will take Canadian or American cases, and we have some incredible colleagues in the US who are willing to help us out as well. So that's kind of, we have an expansion on the move. But what we're also looking for is one, suspects. Do you have any idea of a suspect? Is there anything that we can start going on? Tell us the case, tell us the victims, tell us the story. If there's a timeline, share that with us. If this is something that hasn't been covered, that people don't know about, that people aren't aware of, those are the cases that I like the most. Because, I mean, you guys are the US, you've got so much true crime. I don't know, people who are working on this. And so many cases have been covered. And again, we really do focus on the people who feel that their cases have been ignored or neglected or overlooked. So if there's something, if you even had an experience and you're like, this was really odd. And then at the same time in my city where this really weird thing happened to me, a bunch of women went missing, tell us about that. Um, we do need to we are very systematic, but the way I do it is so intuitive that I find it really hard to verbalize. Like sometimes you just know. You're like, that is a good case. But I don't know until you send it to me, so send it to me and I'll figure it out.
Nice. Nancy, were you going to say something?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Yeah, and that's right. And so like that's what I thought was so powerful too on episode 1. It was like, I think my ex might be a serial killer. Like that was like that's exactly an example of what you're talking about, right? If you have someone that you think could be a suspect, like go ahead and reach out to you.
Yes, because even if it's not something that we can fully dedicate all of our time and energy to in the Midnight Order, we also have our second group. We've got the Society, right? The Society of Umbrasentia, Society of Shadow Knowledge, and they're the up and coming group. And so it's nice to be able to kind of guide them through. Here's what you would do if you get an email. Here's how you examine it. Here's how you determine what to do. Here's how you respond to the people who reach out. And if you were going to start an investigation, here's how you do it. So even if the Midnight Order doesn't necessarily go into it, the society can definitely, and it's exceptional training. And again, we're here to listen. Don't think of us like cops. We're not. We're going to start from the foundation of we believe you and how can we help?
Mm.
It's also just really interesting, episode 1 is, I think my ex-husband is a serial killer. And underneath that, that's so compelling. It's like, oh my God. And another title I had played with was like Sleeping with the Enemy. It's like, do you know who you lie next to at night? But the theme also there is also, more common with like domestic violence, right? And like, how do we, and that's important to us as well. Like that's acknowledged, like whether or not we can determine this person is a serial killer, whether we're gonna, go through that. But also it's important, I think, for us too, when Sasha's getting all these tips, it's like really also a window into people's experience with their intimate partners, and just the reality of that is so intense for people, that like so much violence happens in the home. And that feels like important just to point out that, like, wow, could it be a serial killer, or could this just be a terrible, abusive partnership or intimate partner violence or something like that? So sorry, that's a bit of a tangent from what to do with tips, but I think that stuff is important too. It's like the reality that a lot of people live with.
Right. Is that information that would go as well into the database to kind of like code like domestic violence, those some unique markers or?
So we include domestic violence in the serial homicide database. It definitely exists and we see it a lot. In the missing murder database, we do have records of people who are murdered and are suspected to have been murdered by their intimate partner, but there's never been an arrest. There's none of that. So yeah, that's recorded.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's part of a larger theme also of like law enforcement needing to really hopefully take seriously like cases of domestic violence and cases of sexual violence, because there are clear patterns in the serial homicide database that point to men who engage in domestic violence. Bruce MacArthur, who Sasha, it's at the beginning of episode 1, he was abusive to men that he slept with. He had already had a charge that he had hit someone violently during or right before sex, right? So it was sort of like, oh, okay, well, he assaulted someone, we'll let it go, let him walk. It's nothing. It's like, no, we need to pay attention when that kind of violence is occurring in a partnership or during a sexual encounter. That's not a good sign, right? That's the kind of violence that can escalate. And it's not a surprise when that pops up on their profile in a serial homicide case. So it's just like a bigger point to like pay attention to domestic abusers, pay attention to rapists, because that behavior can escalate.
Yeah, like I'm about to engage in something really intimate with you, but suddenly I feel violent. Yes, that's definitely an indicator. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know we're almost out of time. If somebody listening and watching to this, how can they access the show? Where can they get to the show?
So the show is launching weekly on Freeform on Tuesdays for 5 weeks, and then the following day it rolls over to Hulu. So it is a weekly show. You have to wait at the end of each episode, tune in and stick around for all of them. So Freeform and Hulu, every Tuesday Freeform, every Wednesday Hulu, and then every Thursday there's an awesome podcast, Inside the Midnight Order, produced with ABC Audio and Freeform, that goes behind the scenes of the episodes, and it goes like a lot deeper. It's like if you want to nerd out on investigation, process, procedure, and data, which I think podcast audiences like to do, it's great. It's like a really fun sort of, if you want to like keep listening to stuff and like learn more. Sasha, episode 1 is a lot about Sasha's methodology and clues that have been found in the databases.
Right. Well,
That's like Apple and Spotify and like wherever you get your podcasts.
nice. Well, I was, like I said, I was hooked after episode 1. I can't wait to see the rest of the journey. Is there anything, I want to give you both the last word, if there's anything else you want to say?
I mean, there's always so much to say. There's so much to say. I think I'll probably just keep it brief. And my thing is, you know, if you're listening and you feel that you have a story or you've had an experience or you want to even just run something by us, don't be afraid. Like we're very real people. We are just academics who are very fortunate to have been platformed by the wonderful Nancy. But just reach out. There's no harm in doing that.
Yeah, and it's a total, honor to get to make this show and get to show the world what Sasha and the team does. And I encourage everyone to really stick around because we have some very explosive findings towards the end of the series.
And wherever you get the opportunity, push for access to information. Expand that access. We need it.
Yes, yes, I follow what you're saying. Wherever you are in the world that you're watching, yes. Well, it's been a privilege and an honor to have this conversation with you ladies. I'm so excited about your work. The show is amazing. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.